nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prananatha padasaro yena premanubhutyasya tattam tam shri gurum bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashodjitam Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdnani Patyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambujo Radha Madana Mohano Kuladi Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Adadanastrinam Dantair Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhuli Syam Janma Janmani Abhira Pali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Shri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haichurastam Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasada Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chittam Satam Madhukari Yatu Pada Padme Bhaktirya Nikilarta Varga Jananiya Brahma Sakshat Krite Anandati Shaya Prada Vishaya Jatsukyat Vimuktiryaya Shri Radha Ramanam Padam Bhajayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Yakarya Vrajalokavat Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Ya Ramya Nikilagha Sangha Shamani Shrotratritim Sangata Yasvadya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yadhari Bhakta Vrinda Mahita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava charges, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Shri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again today we will continue our discussion of Padyavali. So we're now in this section on longing, utkanta, Bhaktas utkanta. And in our last discussion we went through a verse of Madhavendra Puripad in which he expressed longing for the Brahman who's been captured by the gopis and thus is nowhere to be found in the Upanishads. So today we'll look at another verse of Raghupati Upadhyay, one that's well known and also found in the Charitamrita, And then we'll go further into additional verses that describe Bhaktas' longing for Sri Krishna. So, the adhikar for Raganuga sadhana bhakti is lolya, or lobe, for the bhav of brajaparikaras, for the sweetness thereof, for the service thereof, and so forth. So the extent that one has such longing, such intense desire, to that extent one can readily and smoothly engage in Raganuga sadhana bhakti. So to hear expressions in which bhaktas express that very thing, express such longing, express such intense desire, this is also conducive to aspirants who pray and aspire that their heart shall be so purified that that sort of longing can appear within their own. So there's a sort of sympathetic resonance where the spirit and the charm of these expressions of longing can nourish a samskar that gives rise to that longing within one's own heart. So, for this reason, Sri Rupa includes this section on Bhakta's longing here in Padyavali. So, I begin now, verse 98. Next, the compiler cites another verse of Sri Raghupati Upadhyaya, also expressive of longing for Sri Krishna. Read as a statement following the verse under discussion, meaning the previous verse, it is as though the following verse was spoken in response to an inquiry from someone who had heard the previous verse and inquired, O Sadhu, if Parabrahman has been whisked away by the eyes of the Abiris, then where is he now, and what is he doing? So in the previous verse it was said that Parabrahman has been whisked away by the eyes of the Abiris, means he's gone running after them after they cast sidelong glances towards him. So you won't find him in the Upanishads anymore. You won't find him by following the path taught there. You'll have to follow the path that the gopis have left. So this verse, read as a continuation of the previous verse, is saying, okay, if Brahman's been whisked away by the gopis, then where did he go? What's he doing now? So to that, the author replies, Kam prati kathayitum mishe, samprati kova pratītim āyātu, gopati-tanayā-kuñje, gopa-vadhūṭī-viṭaṁ brahma. To whom can I speak? Who now would believe? In the arbors along the daughter of the sun, Brahman is a paramour of cowherds' young wives. So this is extraordinary, especially for persons steeped in the Upanishads, the text of the Vedas. To hear this is difficult to believe. So the author is saying, who can I tell this to? Who will believe if I say that the Brahman, who they're acquainted with as being nirvishesh, nirakar, nishakti, and so forth, that he is savishesh, and not only savishesh, but rasika shekar, the ultimate relisher of rasa, and not only that, but absorbed in relishing rasas to the extent that he's become the paramour of other men's wives, and he's engaged in such affairs in the wonderful land of Vrindavan. This comes as something difficult to immediately accept for persons from that background. So we'll look a little further at the import here. The author's rhetorical questions, to whom can I speak? Who now would believe? Convey that he hesitates to say where Parabrahman is now and what Parabrahman is doing, because a person who can believe the answer is extremely rare. Since even Parikshit Maharaj questioned Shukadeva Goswami about Sri Krishna's behavior with the gopis, after hearing of Sri Krishna's Rasa Leela and his apparently, though not actually, lustful and adulterous enjoyment with them as a paramour, there is no doubt that the subtle purity and beauty of Sri Krishna's Leela in Braja with the gopis is something one has to be very careful in discussing. So, we all know, in today's society, this is something that, scholars or Indologists or various persons read and have, expressed some concerns about, let's say. But not only is it that persons looking at the text are having hesitation about what is described here, but even Parikshit Maharaj within the text is showing some initial difficulty in grasping or understanding how to properly appreciate what Shukadeva Goswami has described. So, attuning to that sensitivity, Raghupati Upadhyaya is saying, who can I tell this to? Who will believe these sort of things? The implication being, it's better not to say, or better not to describe such things to those who don't have the capacity to properly appreciate them. If it is described to a listener who does not have the necessary prior education and a favorable samskara for understanding, that act of describing it can engender disbelief and even contempt for it, rather than belief and adoration. And when a person disbelieves and holds contempt towards Sri Krishna, his eternal companions, their Leela, and those who foster Shraddha in them, then that person runs the risk of committing offense, and thereby entrenching themselves in obstacles to bhakti. Just as it is considered an offense to Sri Bhagavan's name to instruct those who do not have Shraddha in it to chant it, so also someone who speaks of Sri Krishna's confidential Leela with the gopis, among those who do not have Shraddha in it, runs the risk of both committing offense themselves and engendering the likelihood of others committing offense as well. Thus, the author wonders, to whom can I speak who now would believe? The suggested sense is that because one cannot be certain of the mentality of people unknown to oneself, it is only in the context of relations with persons who are well known to oneself and recognized to be eligible that such discussion should take place. Okay, that's clear. A second intention in these rhetorical questions is to evoke the feeling of tremendous wonder that a person with Shraddha will feel in hearing the answer stated in this verse. He who is Para-Brahman, the ultimate object of realization taught principally in the foremost of the Shrutis, the Upanishads, and sought by the followers of the path of Jnana, and who is Bhagavan himself, the ultimate object of worship for all followers of the path of bhakti. He who is replete with all potencies, powers, and magnificences. He who is personally served by Sri Lakshmi Devi in the supremely opulent divine realm of Vaikuntha, and reverently worshipped by all the devas headed by Shiva, Brahma, and Indra. He here is said to be playfully rushing out barefoot along the bank of the Yamuna as a youthful paramour in pursuit of young married cowherd girls who are hiding in the arbors covered with flowering vines and eagerly awaiting his arrival in the secluded reaches of the rustic earthly domain of Braja. There's in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, there's a nice point made of describing how Bhagavan Narayan wears slippers and how his feet never directly come in touch with the ground. But in stark contrast, let alone slippers, Krishna doesn't wear anything on his feet, and not just while he's walking in the jeweled palace, but while he's running with abandon throughout the, unpaved and, not even the paths of Braja, but through the thickets where there are thorns and pebbles and so forth. So what could produce such abandon in him that he's running after to find the gopis waiting for him? Maybe he's late. No time to consider what's on the ground. So all of these things are very extraordinary. So this is another side. In other words, who can I tell? Who will believe? In other words, you could take it in the first sense that we have to be very careful who we talk about this to. Most people will disbelieve it. And in another sense, he's marveling at this. That this is so wonderful. This is so good. Just as if some person in a sports match performs some great accomplishment, then people say it was unbelievable the way that he, scored a point or whatever it was, so something like this, this is just to say that who will believe, as if to say, it's so wonderful, it's unbelievable. So this Krishna, this Brahman, who is now, here captivated, is here in these rustic earthly domain of Braja. Okay, Brahman, Svayam Bhagavan, is captivated by prema to this extent. He is deeply, I think I need an A here. He is a deeply desirous relisher of rasa to such an extreme. This is a tremendous wonder. This reminds me of what we heard today in the discussion of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. I quite liked this point that Sanatana Pad made in the commentary, where he describes Bhagavatva, and this point is being made that Krishna is Priya Prema Paradeen, or he's subject to the prema of his dear ones, or he is captivated by the love of his loved ones. So Sanatana Pad in that regard says that Tadeva Bhagavatva, that the purport of this statement is that is Bhagavan's Bhagavatness, or that is what makes Bhagavan Bhagavan. So, which is to say that what the essential nature, the essential characteristic of Bhagavan that makes him, quote, Bhagavan. So the word Bhagavan in a loose sense means to be illustrious or possessed of excellence or possessed of some great, status or some great, people say opulence. So what is that excellence that characterizes him? It's not just, absolute power or omnipresence or omniscience or something like that, but it's the capacity to become captivated by the love of his loved ones, or in other words, the extent of his affinity for love and his absorption in loving relations, that this itself is Bhagavan's excellence. So Sanatana Pad begins the Bhagavatamrita, the very first verse, Jayati Nija Prema, Nija Padabja Prema Vidhana-tirno, this statement saying, he who's descended to bestow prema for himself has now, by virtue of his appearance as Sri Chaitanya, reached the acme of experience of his own prema for the gopis. So Sanatana Pad begins by speaking of Krishna not as the ultimate object of love, or not the ultimate recipient of love, as Rupa Goswami does in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by saying Akila Rasamrita Murti, but rather as the greatest giver of love, or as the greatest lover, which is to say the person who comes under the sway of love to the greatest extent. So that he begins the text like that, and then here where in the Bhagavatamrita, where it comes to the section where Krishna and Braja Bhakti and Braja Bhav specifically is starting to get described, then he again brings this point that the primary characteristic of Bhagavan is his quality of being captivated by the love of his loved one. So that very same idea is what is expressed or exalted as being so wonderful in this verse. That Parabrahman, Swayam Bhagavan, this Brahman of the Upanishads is captivated by prema like this. That he relishes rasa like this. This is a tremendous wonder. Evoking such wonder, furthermore, implies that Sri Krishna specifically, and not unqualified Brahman or Bhagavan Narayan, the Lord of paramount palatial majesty in Vaikuntha, is the supreme aspect of the paratattva. So this is by making the subject of this verse Brahman rather than Krishna, it creates a significant theological implication. In other words, you might expect this verse to say Krishna is going after cowherd girls in Braj, but it doesn't say Krishna. It says Brahman is doing this. So this is giving a theological contour, if you will, or an implied meaning that is suggesting the superiority of Bhagavan, and specifically Bhagavan Krishna, to even Nirvishesh Brahman as being the ultimate experience of absolute existence. Second, the gopis of Braja, and not sages and ascetics following the path of Gyan, or Lakshmi Devi and a myriad of other deeply adoring reverential bhaktas, are the dearmost companions of Sri Bhagavan, who please him more so than anyone else. So by speaking of Brahman, or by speaking of this word that collectively represents the absolute entity, the implication is also, that if he, was in the Shrutis and is now taken away, he's not saying he was taken to Vaikuntha. He wasn't saying that he was, found on the bed with his feet being massaged by Lakshmi Devi, but rather that he's, running after the gopis on the bank of the Yamuna. So this further implies a theological preferencing, or a superordination, as I think some scholars have put it, of Krishna even to Narayan. And 3, the path of upasana that leads to the attainment of gopi bhava, and not the path of upasana taught in the Shrutis, or that followed by reverential bhaktas and characterized by awareness and admiration of Bhagavan's powerfulness, is the foremost type of upasana. So if the gopis have whisked him away and he's now running after them, then how shall we attain Brahman? We'll have to join the gopis. In other words, we'll have to take up the path of upasana that's aimed at the attainment of gopi bhava. We'll have to take up the path that follows the spirit of their prema. So these are there's a broad theological implication, there's a specific theological implication, there's also an implication about the specificity of practice. So, as it is said by Kavi Karnapur in the Alankar Kostuba, that suggestiveness is the life of poetry. In other words, what makes poetry endearing is not that it just plainly states instructions or just, factually delineates principles or injunctions, but rather that when it speaks so as to suggest their value or their paramountcy, this is, nourishing to, lodging the bhakti samskar within the psyche, to touching the heart or melting the heart, so to speak. So to say these things in this way, in this suggestive manner, is cherished by so many. And evidently cherished by Sri Rupapad, since he included this verse here in this text. So on theme, the prakaran here again is the verse, is the section on longing. So when he's saying, who can I tell, who will believe me? You know, the idea is that he feels such longing for this lila, to participate, to serve in the midst of such exchange, that he feels as though it's something so wonderful, it's indescribable. All right, so there will be some additional verses from Raghupati Upadhyaya a little later in the text. We've seen some earlier, we have these two here, and some more will come up again. So now we come again to some verses of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, which we saw earlier, and which return now. So I'm now switching to the newer file. I was reading off the previous file, so now I come to the fresh file. Next, the compiler cites another verse of Sri Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, wherein a bhakta expresses that upon hearing the sound of Krishna's flute, by virtue of being absorbed in bhava, they long to behold the flute's player, Sri Krishna. Gyātaṁ kāṇabhujaṁ mataṁ paricitaivānvīkṣikī śikṣitā Mīmāṁsā viditaiva sāṅkhya-saraṇir yoge vitīrṇā matiḥ vedāntāṁ pariśīlitāḥ sarabhasaṁ kintu sphuran-mādhurī dhara kachana nanda-sūnu-muralī mac-cittam ākarshati. I have understood the view of Kannada. I am well acquainted with Nyaya. I have studied Mīmāṁsā. I have certainly learned the path of Sāṅkhya. I have knowledge that has fully grasped yoga. I have studied Vedanta deeply in full. But some indescribable flute of the Son of Nanda, tremulating with a stream of sweetness, attracts my mind. So we heard a verse earlier where he spoke in contrast between the beauty, the charm of Krishna Lila and the mind's enrichment or satisfaction found in knowledge or study or analysis of the 6 darshanas. So we won't rehash the discussion we had in regard to the darshanas again here. One can refer back to that from the earlier commentary, but what's mainly being expressed here is this sense of longing, that he feels longing for Krishna, and because of that, he doesn't care about the Shat darshanas anymore. He's a famous Pandit, he's taught them all, he's famous for being an expert in them, but now his mind feels pulled. So this is the power of desire, that when a desire is very strong, it's not that one has to volitionally or by way of inference or by way of discernment think or foster a desire for something, but rather when a desire is very strong, it just emerges, it just repeatedly asserts itself within the mind, so to speak, or as if attracts the mind towards its object, without the person even having to try to think of the object on their own. So this conveys how an intensity of desire or utkanta is expressed here. So the commentator portrays the import of this verse as follows. The author intimates, previously my attention would become absorbed in the subtle significations of the 6 darshanas, since I was conversant in them all. But when, by my great fortune, I heard Sri Krishna's flute, then that sound forcibly freed me from any further thirst for such knowledge, and produced in my heart a deep desire for itself, and all the more for a direct perception of its player. In this way, longing for the sight of Sri Krishna is expressed. Next, the compiler cites another verse of Sri Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, in which further longing to relish the sweetness of Sri Krishna's flute is expressed. Amare mukasidu madhurinam lahari kachana chaturi kalanam tarali kurute mano madiyam murali nara paramour. A wave of sweetnesses, like or superior to the nectar in the mouths of the ladies of Amaravati. Some indescribable expertise in soft, sweet tones. The flow of the notes of Murari's flute makes my mind reel. The ladies of Amaravati, so Amaravati is the capital of Svarga. And in particular there's what's known as the Nandana gardens, or this, sprawling pleasure gardens. So the Devis of Svarga, led by Sachi, the wife of Indra, are known to drink various highly palatable intoxicants. So these Devis in their, fine fashion and fine forms like to gather in these pleasure gardens and drink some beverages which, unlike you'll find on the earth, are both highly intoxicating and highly palatable. Alcohol in this world is not very tasty, no matter what you add to it. But those in Svarga, they can experience the pleasure of becoming intoxicated and drinking a beverage that's tasty at the same time. The sweetness of Sri Krishna's flute, that is, the flow of its notes expressed with immense expertise in producing soft, sweet tones, is compared to those nectars, because it is also a highly relishable intoxicant, in that once it is imbibed, the mind reels, that is, goes from stable to unstable. I just had to include that. Sometimes I just like how Sanskrit commentators can just be very clear and thorough. What does it mean to be intoxicated, or what does it mean for the mind to reel? For it to go from stable to unstable. So, as someone in a pleasure garden drinking this highly tasty nectarian beverage, in one sense it's God's grace upon the people of the world that, alcohol is not very tasty, because if it were tasty, people would drink it all the more. At least there's some cap on how much some deterrent is there. But for these people in Svarga, there's no such deterrent, because while it's intoxicating, it's also very nice to just drink. So similarly, Krishna's flute is also, you could say, dangerous in the sense that it's highly pleasurable to hear, it's highly pleasurable to allow to enter through one's ear into one's heart and mind. And at the same time, it produces great inebriation as well. So, the commentator also offers another purport to this verse. Once the ladies of Amaravati hear the wave of the sweetnesses of the nectar of Sri Krishna's flute song, they detest even the nectar of Svarga. So this is the other sense. You can interpret the compound because it's just a compound saying that there's a waves of sweetnesses that are they like the nectar that these devis drink, or are they better than? It's just by the hermeneutic rules of how you interpret compounds, you could take it either way. So that's why the commentator gives two different readings to say it's like it or it's greater than it. So if it were greater than it, then the purport of the greaterness would be that the ladies of Svarga don't even bother drinking that nectar, that intoxicant that they drink in Svarga, once they hear Krishna's flute. So, the effect of the flute's notes on the ladies of Svarga is also described by the gopis of Braja to one another in the Yugal Gita as follows. So in the first pair of the verses in the Yugal Gita, the gopis envision, the devis moving in their flying flower ships, accompanied by their husbands, and suddenly hearing the flute stopping and becoming, amazed. So this is how they the gopis perceive the devis of Svarga. So they say, Vama bahu krita vama kapolo, balgita brura dararpita venum, kumalangulu bhirashrita margam, gopyai rayati yatra mukunda, vyomayana vanita sahasidhayar, vismitas tarupadharya salajja, kama margana samarpita chitta, kashmalam yayurapasmrita nibhya. O gopis, when Mukunda, his left cheek turned towards his left shoulder, and his eyebrows dancing, plays the flute placed on his lips, covering its holes with his tender fingers, then the women in sky vehicles, although along with the siddhas, meaning although along with their husbands, upon hearing it, become astonished, bashful, of mind given over to the arrows of kama, bewildered, and unconscious of their waistbands falling loose. So this is the as though inebriated or intoxicated state that they enter. So, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is saying that this sound of the flute is like a wave of sweetnesses, and when one, so to speak, tastes that flow or that wave of sweetnesses by hearing the sound of Krishna's flute, hearing the flow of its notes, then the mind reels, or then one becomes deeply enamored. So the broader implication would be that the pleasures had by these devis in Svarga are superior to any of the pleasures you could ever have in earthly life. And if even those devis of Svarga become transfixed and overwhelmed by hearing the soft, sweet notes of Krishna's flute, then what sort of extraordinary aesthetic delight is that? What sort of expertise and artistic charm is that? It's, otherworldly and then, beyond otherworldly. So, if one can relate to the mind's tendency to long for varieties of pleasure and enjoyment in this world, then how much longing is that experience of hearing Krishna's flute worth? Or how much longing is it due? Although the mind in its conditioned state may not have the same tendency to gravitate towards that as it might to the objects of this world that we have strong samskars for as a result of direct experience of them in the past. Although the mind might seemingly gravitate to those more readily, that doesn't that ought not be considered that the pleasure they produce is superior and that's why the mind is becoming absorbed in them. Rather, although they produce meager, arguably not just meager pleasure, but no pleasure in comparison, or negligible pleasure in comparison to that supreme experience of hearing Krishna's flute heard by one whose heart is filled with bhava for him. The profundity of that delight would be superlative, but because we don't have any, or we have little, if any, samskar for such an experience, then there's commensurately lesser desire for it. So, nevertheless, it's by hearing about such experience, the prospect of such experience, that gradually the bhakti samskar, gradually the impressions of Braja can make their way into the psyche, into the mind, and then gradually one's eligibility for this path of Raganuga Bhakti can mature. So, to hear about Bhagavan's form, his qualities, his leelas, and moreover to hear about the love that the Brajabasis have for those things, this is what can immerse one in what will result in one acquiring further eligibility for this path, or in essence also following the path, since as we hear in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, tat tat katha ritascha so kuryat brajabasam sada, that those who are engaged in hearing and praising that are the ones who perform this sadhana. This is a point that's highlighted by Radha Krishna Das Goswami in his commentary, which we discussed much earlier in the Padyavali discussions, where, the performer of Raganuga Bhakti sadhana is defined as one who engages in hearing and praising of such lila. And then that person who is engaged in hearing and praising may also engage in other varieties of seva on the basis of that. So the purport being that the fundamental orienting and primary aspect of the sadhana is Shravan Kirtan related to this subject matter rather. Okay, so 2 verses from Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So I have, I think, one more. I think we have time. So this comes from an anonymous author. Next, the compiler cites a verse which indicates that the inebriating effect of the sound of the flute, as described in the last verse, need not be considered surprising when Sri Krishna himself, the flute's player, is known to be the greatest of thieves. So he has this sound that mesmerizes people like this. Well, what's the surprise? He's the biggest thief there is. He's the ultimate trickster, or person who pulls the wool over people. So he says, Aparati mano meko pyayam Krishna chora pranata durita chora puttana prana chora valaya vasana choro bala gopi jananam nayana hridaya chora pashyatam sajjananam. So there's also some charm in the composition of this verse. It has rhyming pairs of lines and the repetition of the word chora, or thief, in the verse in every line, 5 times total. So with that he says, someone steals away my mind, this dark thief, the thief of the sins of the bowed, the thief of Putana's vital air, the thief of the bracelets and garments of the young gopi girls, the thief of the eyes and hearts of the sadhus who behold him. So he intentionally doesn't say Krishna is the thief who X, Y, and Z. Someone. So someone steals away my mind. He who steals away all these other things, he's now captivating my mind, which is another way of saying I feel utkanta, I feel this intense longing for him. So he's in a roundabout way saying that his beautiful figure, his charming appearance, his graciousness in liberating Putana, his capacity to purify us of our material sins and entanglements, his charming leelas with the gopis, his acceptance of their complete surrender to him, their complete offering of themselves to him, their desire to sport with him, all of these things deepen my desire for him. This is essentially what he's conveying. So the author first states that his mind has been stolen away to immediately convey feelings of captivation and longing. He initially refers to Sri Krishna only as, quote, someone, to convey that he perceives Krishna to be extraordinary, and then speaks of him as, quote, this dark thief, to indicate that the beauty of Sri Krishna's complexion and figure have captivated his mind, and to convey that he feels as though he is perceiving Sri Krishna directly as a result of his intense longing to do so. So something like, sometimes suppose someone is sneaking up on you, and you can tell that they're sneaking up on you, then you might say, is somebody there? Where you know that someone's there, but you're speaking of somebody in a way to convey that you're aware of who the person is. So something like that, he's saying, someone is captivating my mind, as though, Krishna has, come into his heart or captivated his heart, and it's as if he's, acknowledging this to Krishna himself. Someone has come along. He then speaks of a number of Sri Krishna's wonderful acts and qualities as the acts of a thief, to further convey his feeling of captivation and longing for Sri Krishna. So sometimes when we very much appreciate something, we may speak of it as though it's something non-appreciable, as a playful way of showing the extent of our appreciation. So this verse is ornamented with that manner of expression. The thief of the sins of the bowed alludes to Sri Krishna's quality of removing the sins of his bhaktas, who humbly bow to him as they take shelter in him and honor him, since he avows this in his final teaching to Arjuna in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Sarva-dharman parityaja, etc., completely relinquishing all dharmas, take shelter solely in me. I will free you from all sins, do not grieve. The thief of Putana's vital air refers to Sri Krishna's tremendous act of grace in bestowing upon Putana someone, who was attempting to murder him, the destiny of receiving in his eternal Leela the role of a nurse, just because she caressed him affectionately like a mother, and dressed herself beautifully like a Braja Gopi, when she attempted to murder him. So this verse came recently in our discussion of Sharanagati. Aho bakiyam stana-kāla-kutam jigam sayapāya-yarapya sadvi lebhe gatim datrutitam tatonyam kumbādayalum sharanam vrajema. Aho, in what compassionate person could we possibly take shelter other than he whom Putana fed lethal poison on her breast with the intent to kill him, and yet still, although she was wicked, attained a position appropriate for a nurse. Similarly, we also hear elsewhere in the 10th canto, Sadveshadapi putanapi sakula tvam eva deva pita. Even Putana, along with her family, was caused to attain you, just because of her wearing the fine dress donned by cowherd women, which is very dear to Sri Krishna, as a disguise in her attempt to murder him. So here it's saying Putana and her family was blessed by Krishna to attain him just because of the fine dress that she wore, just because she looked so nice, as if she were a beautiful gopi while she tried to murder him. So Krishna can overlook a fault, perhaps the worst of all faults, and still appreciate qualities. The thief of the bracelets and garments of the young gopi girls refers to Sri Krishna's hiding the bracelets and garments of a group of young gopi girls bathing in the Yamuna, who had just completed a month-long rite of worship of Katyayani Devi, with the desire to attain Krishna as their husband. His hiding their clothes and then inducing them to come out of the river unclothed to reclaim them was his way of assuring to them that he would fulfill their desire. He also professed this to them, saying, Sankalpa vidita sadvo bhavatinam mararchanam mayanamudita so satyo bhavitum arhati namaya vishita diyam kama kamaya kalpate Bharjita kvotita dhana prayobijaya neshyate Yatha bala brajam siddha maye marang syatha kshapa Yadudishya vratam idam cheru arya janam sati. O honorable girls, your resolve in worshipping me is understood. It is approved by me and fit to become true. The desire of those whose minds are absorbed in me does not lead to desire, that is, desire for anything else. Do fried and boiled roasted grains likely act as seeds? Certainly not. O girls, return to the village, you all are successful. You will enjoy these nights with me, this being the aim for the sake of which you performed this rite of worship of Katyayani, O chaste ones. So this is where in the Bhagavatam it's explained that why Krishna stole their garments and what they wanted and how they got what they wanted. In gist, obviously there's more to that lila than what's said here. We're just conveying the summary. So lastly, the thief of the eyes and hearts of the sadhus who behold him refers to Sri Krishna's beautiful figure, being captivating to the eyes of the hearts of Bhaktas, and all who are of sanctified mind. As the compiler alludes to by means of a playful prohibition on going to see the deity of Sri Krishna present at Keshitirtha in Sri Vrindavan. So he's saying that Krishna steals away the eyes and the hearts of sadhus. So Rupa Goswami writes to this effect in this famous verse, Smeram bangi traya paricitim satchivistirna drishtim Vangsinyastad harakishalayam ujjalam chandrakena Govindakyam haritanumita keshitirtopakante ma prekshishtas tavajadisake bandhu sangestiranga. O friend, if you take pleasure in the company of kinsmen, then from here do not look towards the figure of Hari, known as Govinda, near Keshitirtha, smiling with the flute fixed on the sprouts of his lips as he casts sidelong glances in a threefold posture and stands with the eye of a peacock feather decorating his diadem. The purport of the verse under discussion is that the author playfully speaks of Sri Krishna as a thief because he feels his own eyes and mind have been stolen by Sri Krishna, and thus he feels he has no attraction to anything else anywhere. He deeply longs only to directly behold Sri Krishna. So as we said before, it's one thing to desire something, and then it's another thing to feel such an intense desire that it's as though the desire is more powerful than the mind and pulling one's attention and mind towards something. So by describing Krishna as a thief in all of these ways, he's professing this feeling of intense longing as though this longing, this desire is pulling him towards Krishna. So what a more blessed state of mind is there than that? So I'll conclude here for today. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share. All right, well, we can conclude here. So we're on our way through this section on longing, and it will continue for a number of additional verses. Vaishnavibhyo namo nama, Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.